The bedroom was a tomb of silence, the kind that presses against your chest until you forget how to breathe. Jason Cook lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily in the dark. Its hum the only sound in their suburban Seattle home. Beside him, Caitlin, his wife of 10 years, faced the wall, her back a cold barrier. The clock glowed 1:47 a.m. He hadn't slept well in months, not since their conversations dwindled to logistics, bills, groceries, who'd take the car for an oil change. Tonight, though, the silence felt different, heavier, like it was hiding something. He reached out, his hand hovering over her shoulder, not to touch but to feel the ghost of a connection they'd lost. Then she spoke, her voice flat, cutting through the dark. "I'm not your responsibility, Jason. And you're not mine." The words landed like a slap, sharp and final. He froze, his hand still in the air, as the truth settled in. This wasn't a fight. This was an ending. Jason, 38, was a project manager at a mid-sized tech firm in downtown Seattle. His days were a blur of Zoom calls, deadlines, and lukewarm coffee from the office Keurig. He lived in Bellevue, a tidy suburb where every house looked like it belonged in a real estate ad. Manicured lawns, SUVs and driveways, porch lights that flickered on at dusk. He and Caitlin, 35, a marketing strategist, had bought their home 5 years ago, back when they still dreamed of kids, weekend hikes in the Cascades, and a life that felt like theirs. They'd met in college, bonded over late-night diner runs and shared playlists, her laugh bright enough to make him believe in forever. But somewhere along the way, forever became routine. Caitlin threw herself into her career, staying late at the office, traveling for conferences, while Jason kept the home fires burning, cooking dinners she barely touched, folding laundry she'd leave in piles. He didn't mind at first. He loved her ambition, her drive. But her absence grew, not just physical but emotional, like she'd checked out of their marriage without bothering to tell him. Mornings started early for Jason. He'd jog along the trails near Lake Sammamish, the mist curling off the water, earbuds blasting indie rock to drown out the questions he didn't want to ask. Was she happy? Was he? By the time he showered and drove to work, Caitlin was already gone, her coffee mug in the sink, lipstick smudged on the rim. Their evenings were no better. She'd scroll through her phone at the dinner table, answering his questions with nods or half sentences. "Work's crazy," she'd say, or "I'm just tired." He'd nod, swallow his frustration, and try again the next day. He wasn't perfect. Maybe he worked too much. Maybe he didn't push hard enough to reconnect, but he tried. He left notes on the fridge, planned date nights she canceled, suggested therapy she dismissed with a wave. "We're fine," she'd say, but her eyes never met his. The cracks had started showing a year ago. Small things at first. Caitlin stopped wearing her wedding ring, claiming it irritated her skin. She'd come home late, smelling of wine and perfume he didn't recognize. When he asked about her day, she'd snap. "Can you not interrogate me?" He backed off, chalking it up to stress. But the distance grew. She'd laugh at texts he couldn't see, hide her phone when he walked into the room. He wanted to trust her, to believe this was just a phase, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd lie awake, replaying their last real conversation, Christmas, when they'd talked about renovating the guest room, maybe for a nursery. She'd smiled then, her hand brushing his. Now, that memory felt like a relic from someone else's life. Tonight's words, "I'm not your responsibility," weren't a surprise, not really. They were the culmination of months of unspoken truths. Jason lay there, his heart pounding, trying to piece together when it all went wrong. Was it the promotion she got 2 years ago, the one that pulled her into a world of late nights and new colleagues? Was it him, too comfortable in their routine, assuming love could survive on inertia? He didn't know. What he did know was the ache in his chest, the realization that the woman he'd built his life around didn't want him in hers. He waited for her to say something else, to soften the blow, but she didn't. She just lay there, breathing evenly, like she'd already moved on. He couldn't stay in that bed, that room, that house. Moving quietly, he slid out from under the covers, grabbed a hoodie and jeans from the chair, and dressed in the dark. The house felt foreign, the hallway lined with photos of better days, their wedding in Portland, a trip to San Francisco, her smile wide and real. He didn't look too long. Downstairs, he slipped on his sneakers, grabbed his keys, and stepped into the cool Bellevue night. The street was still, porch lights off, the only sound a distant dog barking. He got in his car, a beat-up Subaru he'd driven since grad school, and started the engine. He didn't know where he was going, only that staying meant disappearing. The roads were empty, Seattle's glow fading as he drove east toward Lake Sammamish. Strip malls and gas stations blurred past, their neon signs flickering in the fog. His phone sat untouched in the passenger seat. He didn't want to see if she'd texted, didn't want to know if she hadn't. An hour later, he found himself on a familiar gravel road, one he hadn't driven in years. The campground by the lake, where he and his brother used to fish as kids, back when summers were endless and life didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. The cabins were gone now, replaced by a scattering of trailers, but one glowed softly in the dark, its curtains tinged yellow. He parked, his headlights cutting through the pines, and sat there, gripping the wheel. This wasn't a plan. It was instinct, a pull to somewhere quiet, somewhere he could breathe. He stepped out, the air sharp with pine and damp earth. The trailer's porch creaked under his weight as he knocked. The door opened, revealing a grizzled man in a flannel shirt, his face weathered but kind. "Jason Cook," the man said, not a question. "Didn't think I'd see you out here again." It was Sam, a family friend who'd run the campground since Jason was a kid. Sam didn't ask why he was there, just stepped aside. "Couch is free. Coffee's bad, but it's hot." Jason nodded, grateful for the lack of questions. He dropped his keys on a side table, sank onto the worn couch, and let the quiet wrap around him. For the first time in months, the world didn't feel like it was collapsing. It was just still. Jason woke to the smell of burnt coffee and the faint creak of floorboards as Sam shuffled around the trailer's tiny kitchen. Sunlight slipped through faded curtains, casting stripes across the couch where he'd slept, still in his hoodie and jeans. His phone lay on the side table, screen dark, untouched. He didn't check it. Didn't want to see Caitlin's name, or worse, the absence of it. The clock on the wall read 7:12 a.m., but time felt irrelevant here, miles from the hum of Seattle and the life he'd left behind. Sam slid a chipped mug across the counter, steam rising from the black liquid inside. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly, then went back to flipping through a dog-eared fishing magazine. Jason managed a half-smile, wrapping his hands around the mug. The warmth grounded him, a small anchor in the haze of last night's exit. He stepped outside, the morning air crisp against his skin, Lake Sammamish glinting through the trees. The campground was quiet, just the rustle of leaves and a distant bird call. He sat on a splintered bench, sipping coffee that tasted like ash but warmed his chest. His mind replayed Caitlin's words. "Not your responsibility," like a loop he couldn't pause. They stung, but they also clarified something he'd been avoiding. Their marriage hadn't just drifted. It had been abandoned, not by him but by her. He thought of the nights he'd cooked dinner, hoping she'd sit with him, only for her to eat in front of her laptop, answering emails. The times he'd suggested a weekend away, only to hear, "I'm swamped, maybe next month." He'd kept trying, kept believing effort could fix what she'd already let go. Back in Bellevue, he'd ignored the signs. The way she'd stopped asking about his day, her answers clipped when he asked about hers. The perfume he didn't recognize, the late nights she blamed on client dinners. He'd told himself it was stress, that her promotion to senior strategist had stretched her thin. But doubt had crept in, quiet at first, then louder. 2 weeks ago, he'd come home early and found her on the phone, her laugh bright, unguarded, the way it used to be with him. "Who was that?" he'd asked, keeping his tone light. Her face hardened. "Work stuff. Why do you always need to know?" The defensiveness cut deeper than the question. He'd let it go, but the seed was planted. Yesterday it sprouted. He'd been vacuuming the car, a mundane Saturday chore, when he found a receipt tucked under the passenger seat. Dinner for two at a downtown bistro, dated last Thursday, when Caitlin said she was at a team meeting. The total, $142 with a bottle of Pinot Noir, felt like a betrayal in ink. He didn't confront her, not then. He shoved the receipt in his pocket, spent the day pretending everything was fine. But that night, lying in bed, her words had shattered the pretense. She wasn't just distant. She was gone. Now, sitting by the lake, Jason felt the weight of it. Not anger, not yet, but a raw, hollow ache. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the idea that she'd found someone else or the realization that he'd been invisible to her for so long. He'd spent years building a life for them, paying the mortgage, planning vacations she barely joined, keeping their home a home, while she'd slipped away, piece by piece. He wondered when she'd stopped seeing him, when he'd become just a fixture, like the couch or the coffee maker. Sam wandered out, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling into the morning mist. "You planning to stay, or just passing through?" he asked, squinting at the lake. Jason shrugged. "Don't know yet." Sam nodded, like he heard it before. "Take your time. Lake's not going anywhere." He flicked ash into the dirt and headed back inside, leaving Jason with the quiet. He appreciated Sam's lack of probing. No one here expected him to explain himself, to justify the mess he'd driven away from. It was a relief, like shedding a too-tight skin. By noon, Jason walked the trails around the lake, gravel crunching under his sneakers. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, a stark contrast to the sterile hum of his office. He thought about work, his inbox probably overflowing, his team waiting for updates, but felt distant, irrelevant. He'd always been good at his job, managing projects with a calm efficiency that earned him respect, if not promotions. But it hadn't been enough to keep Caitlin's attention, or maybe it had never been about that. She'd climbed her own ladder, her world expanding while it stayed small, tethered to their home, their promises. He stopped at a clearing, the lake stretching wide and still before him. A memory surfaced. Him and his brother, maybe 12, fishing here with their dad, laughing as they tangled their lines. Life was simpler then, the future a vague, shiny thing. He'd imagined a family of his own one day, kids running through a backyard, Caitlin beside him, her laugh filling the air. That dream felt naive now, a sketch erased by time. He didn't cry, didn't yell. He just stood there, letting the lake's stillness seep into him, softening the edges of his hurt. Back at the trailer, he finally checked his phone. No texts, no calls. Caitlin hadn't reached out. Not even a "where are you?" The silence was louder than her words last night. He powered it off again, tossed it into his bag. Part of him wanted to drive back, demand answers, but what would that solve? She'd made her choice, and he wasn't sure he wanted to hear her explain it. Instead, he grabbed a notebook from Sam's cluttered shelf, an old thing with yellowed pages, and started writing. Not a letter, not a plan, just thoughts, fragments of the life he'd left. "I tried," he wrote. "I stayed too long." It wasn't much, but it felt like a start, a way to name the ache without letting it define him. As the sun dipped low, painting the lake gold, Jason sat on the trailer's porch, a second mug of bad coffee in hand. He didn't know what came next, tomorrow, next week, next year. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from that uncertainty. He was here, breathing present. The lake stretched out, calm and unjudging, and he let himself believe, just for a moment, that he could be too. The days at Lake Sammamish blurred into a quiet rhythm, each one softer than the last. Jason woke early, the trailer's thin walls letting in the hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through pines. He'd make coffee, Sam's instant stuff, gritty but warm, and sit on the porch, watching mist lift off the lake. His phone stayed off, buried in his bag, a deliberate choice to keep Caitlin's world at bay. He wasn't ready to face her texts, if there were any, or the lack of them. The campground felt like a pause, a place where time didn't demand answers. Sam kept his distance, offering only the occasional grunt or a plate of slightly stale toast. "You're not dead," he'd said yesterday, tossing Jason a fishing rod. "Might as well do something." Jason hadn't fished since he was a kid, but he took the rod, spent an hour by the water, and caught nothing but a snag. It didn't matter. The act of trying felt like enough. He'd been here 4 days now, his life in Bellevue a fading echo. Work hadn't called, his out-of-office reply was probably holding the line, and he hadn't checked his email. The thought of his desk, the endless JIRA tickets, the polite small talk in the break room, felt like a different man's life. He wondered if Caitlin had noticed his absence, if she'd walked through their house and felt the quiet he'd left behind. He doubted it. Her words, "I'm not your responsibility," had been so final, like she'd already closed the door on him. The receipt from the bistro, that $142 betrayal, lingered in his mind. He didn't need proof of an affair to know she'd chosen something else, someone else, over him. The truth was in her distance, her guarded phone, the way she'd stopped saying his name. That morning, he walked to the lake's edge, skipping stones across the glassy surface. Each ripple felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer. What now? Go back? Start over? The lake didn't reply, but its stillness steadied him. He thought about the life he'd built, 10 years with Caitlin, a house they'd painted together, plans they'd whispered in the dark. He'd been the one to hold it together, to believe in it, while she slipped away. The ache wasn't just loss. It was the realization he'd been fighting for something she'd already let go. He'd ignored the signs, her late nights, her sharp tone, the way she'd flinch when he touched her hand, because admitting the truth meant admitting he wasn't enough. Back at the trailer, he found Sam cleaning a rusty tackle box. "You ever been married?" Jason asked, surprising himself. Sam snorted, not looking up. "Once. Didn't stick. People change, or they don't. Either way, you can't make him stay." The words were blunt, but they landed. Jason nodded, filing them away. He didn't want to talk about Caitlin. Not yet, but Sam's matter-of-fact tone was a reminder. Life went on, with or without her. He spent the afternoon wandering the trails, his sneakers sinking into damp earth. The forest smelled of moss and possibility, a contrast to the sterile air of his office. He felt lighter here, unburdened by expectations. No one asked him to fix anything, to be anything. By evening, he was back on the porch, a notebook in his lap. He'd been writing more, not stories but fragments, memories, regrets, things he wished he'd said. "I stayed because I thought it was love," he wrote. But it was habit. The words felt true, raw. He wasn't angry, not exactly. More like awake, seeing his life for what it was, a series of choices he'd made to keep the peace, to avoid the truth. He'd let himself shrink, become a version of Jason who apologized for existing. That man was still in Bellevue, haunting their house. Out here, he was starting to remember who he'd been before, a guy who loved photography, who'd spend hours framing shots of the Puget Sound, who laughed without checking if it was okay. The next day, he borrowed Sam's old Polaroid camera, a clunky thing with a cracked lens. He walked to the lake, snapping photos of the water, the trees, the way light broke through clouds. The images were grainy, imperfect, but they felt alive. He pinned one to the trailer's wall, a shot of the dock at dawn, mist curling like a promise. It was the first thing he'd done in years that wasn't for someone else. That afternoon, he drove into town, a small strip of shops near the lake. He bought a sandwich at a deli, sat on a bench, and watched people go by, families, joggers, and old couples sharing ice cream. Life moved on, simple and unapologetic, and he wanted to be part of it again. At the deli, he overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. Two women at the next table, talking about a colleague's divorce. She didn't even see it coming, one said. He was so quiet, kept everything inside, then just left. Jason's chest tightened. Was that him? The quiet guy, bottling it up until he broke? He didn't want to be that story, didn't want to disappear without a trace. He paid for his sandwich and drove back to the campground, the women's words echoing. He needed to face what he'd left, not run from it. Not yet, but soon. That night, he sat by a small campfire Sam had built, the flames crackling against the dark. The lake reflected stars, a mirror of light and shadow. He thought about the receipt, the bistro, the life he'd tried to save. He didn't hate Caitlin, not really. She'd made her choices, just as he'd made his by staying too long. He pulled out the notebook, wrote, "I'm not running. I'm choosing." It felt like a vow, small but solid. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he couldn't go back to being invisible. The fire popped, sending sparks into the sky, and for the first time in years, Jason felt like he was waking up. The campground's quiet had become a kind of home, its rhythms, birdsong at dawn, the lake's gentle lap against the shore, grounding Jason in a way Bellevue never had. He'd been here a week, his life before the drive out feeling like a half-remembered dream. He woke early, made coffee, and sat on the trailer's porch, the Polaroid camera beside him. He'd taken more photos, a heron mid-flight, a ripple catching sunrise, each one a step towards seeing the world, and himself, clearly. His phone stayed off, its silence a choice, not a punishment. He wasn't ready to face Caitlin's world, her explanations or lack of them. Here, he could breathe, think, start to untangle the man he'd been from the one he wanted to be. Sam had taken to leaving him small tasks, stacking firewood, cleaning the tackle box, less out of need and more to keep him moving. Idle hands make a mess, Sam muttered once, tossing him a rag. Jason didn't mind. The work was simple, purposeful, unlike the endless emails and deadlines of his old life. He called his office 2 days ago, told his boss he needed personal time. Take what you need, she'd said, her tone kind but clipped, already moving on to the next crisis. He hadn't checked his email since. Work like Bellevue felt like a skin he was shedding, piece by piece. His notebook was filling up, pages crowded with thoughts he hadn't known he carried. I thought love meant staying, he wrote one morning. But maybe it means letting go. The words came easier now, each one a brick in a new foundation. He wasn't angry at Caitlin anymore, not exactly. The ache was still there, but it was softer, less jagged. He saw her choices for what they were, hers, not a judgment on his worth. The bistro receipt, her guarded phone, her cold words in the dark, they weren't about him failing. They were about her leaving. He'd spent years trying to be enough, but enough for what? A marriage she'd already abandoned? That afternoon, he walked into town again, the lake's gravel roads giving way to asphalt and shop fronts. He stopped at a bookstore, its shelves crammed with paperbacks and local guides. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with a warm smile, chatted about the weather, the lake, the way spring always felt like a promise. Jason bought a used copy of a photography book, its pages dog-eared but full of light and shadow. As he paid, she tilted her head. You look like you're finding something out here. He nodded, surprised. Trying to. Her words stayed with him, a quiet affirmation that he was on some kind of path, even if he didn't know where it led. Back at the campground, he was flipping through the book when a car pulled up, its tires crunching gravel. He looked up, half expecting Sam's truck, but it was a blue hatchback, unfamiliar. The door opened, and out stepped Emily, a friend from high school he hadn't seen in years. She was 37 now, her dark hair tied back, her smile hesitant but real. Jason Cook, she said, shutting the car door. Sam said you were hiding out here. He stood, caught off guard. Not hiding, just staying. She laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight. Same difference. They sat on the porch, sharing a thermos of tea she'd brought. Emily taught 5th grade in Issaquah, lived with her daughter, Sophie, 10, all questions and freckles. She'd moved back after her own marriage fell apart, a story she told without bitterness. We grew apart, she said, shrugging. He wanted a life I couldn't fit into. Took me a while to stop blaming myself. Jason nodded, her words echoing his own thoughts. He told her about leaving Bellevue, about Caitlin's distance, though he skipped the receipt, the raw edge of that wound. Emily listened, her eyes steady, not pitying but present. Sometimes you have to walk away to find yourself, she said. Doesn't make it easier, but it's true. They talked until dusk, the lake turning silver behind them. Emily didn't push, didn't ask for details he wasn't ready to give. She told stories about Sophie, her obsession with astronomy, her habit of naming stray cats, and Jason found himself laughing, a sound he barely recognized. Before she left, she scribbled her number on a napkin. If you're ever in Issaquah, Sophie'd love to meet someone who doesn't roll their eyes at her telescope. He smiled, pocketing the napkin. No promises, but I'll think about it. She drove off, her taillights fading into the trees, and Jason sat there, the napkin in his hand, feeling seen for the first time in years. That night, he wrote again, I don't need to be fixed. I just need to be me. The words felt like a door opening, small but real. He thought about Emily, her easy laugh, the way she listened without expecting anything. It wasn't romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something, connection, unforced, unguarded. He pinned another Polaroid to the wall, a shot of the lake at twilight, its edges soft, like the future he was starting to imagine. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he wasn't going back to the man who'd begged for scraps of attention. That Jason was gone, and he wasn't sorry. The lake's stillness had become Jason's mirror, reflecting a man he was starting to recognize. 2 weeks into his stay at the campground, the trailer's creaks and Sam's gruff hospitality felt like home, more than Bellevue ever had. He woke with the sun, brewed coffee, and walked the trails, his Polaroid camera slung around his neck. Each photo, moss on a fallen log, a canoe tethered to the dock, felt like a piece of himself reclaimed. His phone, still off, was a relic in his bag, its silence a boundary he wasn't ready to cross. He didn't want Caitlin's voice, real or imagined, pulling him back to a life that no longer fit. Here, he was learning to exist without apology, to take up space for himself. He'd started helping Sam more, splitting logs for the fire, fixing a leaky faucet in the trailer's tiny sink. The work was grounding, its simplicity a balm after years of navigating office politics and Caitlin's moods. Sam didn't thank him, just nodded and handed him a beer at dusk. "You're not useless," he said once, which Jason took as high praise. He'd also kept writing, his notebook now a patchwork of thoughts and memories. "I stayed because I thought I had to," he wrote one morning. "But leaving was the first thing I did for me." The words weren't poetry, but they were honest, each one a step toward clarity. Emily had stopped by again, unannounced, with a bag of groceries and a story about Sophie's latest science project, a model solar system that took over their living room. They'd sat by the lake, sharing apples and talking about nothing and everything. High school pranks, her divorce, his love for photography. "You should do something with those," she said, nodding at his Polaroids pinned to the trailer's wall. "They're good. Really good." He shrugged, but her words stuck, a spark he hadn't felt in years. She left with a wave, promising to drag him to Issaquah for coffee soon. He didn't mind the idea. Emily's presence was easy, like a song you didn't realize you knew the words to. But the campground couldn't be forever. Jason knew he'd have to face Bellevue, not to fix things with Caitlin, but to close that chapter. He'd been avoiding it, letting the lake's quiet cocoon him, but avoidance wasn't freedom. It was delay. That afternoon, he sat on the dock, sketching out a plan in his notebook. Step 1, call a lawyer. Step 2, go back, pack his things. Step 3, figure out what came next. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He'd read about divorce online, using Sam's ancient laptop, and learned Washington's no-fault laws meant he didn't need to prove Caitlin's distance to end things. That felt right. He didn't want to fight, just a way out. The next day, he drove to a coffee shop in Issaquah with Wi-Fi and emailed a divorce attorney, a woman with good reviews and a no-nonsense bio. He kept it brief. Married 10 years, no kids, ready to move on. She replied within hours, scheduling a call for tomorrow. Jason felt a mix of relief and dread, like stepping off a ledge but trusting the ground below. He also emailed his boss, extending his leave another week. Personal matters, he wrote, vague but true. Work could wait. For once, he was prioritizing himself. Back at the campground, he found a voicemail from Emily, her voice bright. "Sophie's got a school art fair Saturday. She's showing her constellation drawings. Want to come? No pressure." He smiled, saved the message. The idea of a kid's art fair, of being around people who didn't know his story, felt possible, even good. He texted her back, his first text in weeks, saying he'd try. It was a small step, but it mattered. He was starting to see a life beyond the trailer, beyond the hurt. That evening, he walked to the lake, the sky bruising purple. He thought about Caitlin, not with anger, but with distance. He didn't hate her. She'd chased her own path, just as he was finding his. The bistro receipt, her late nights, her coldness, they were her choices, not his failures. He'd spent years trying to be what she needed, dimming himself to fit her world. No more. He pulled out his notebook, wrote, "I'm enough. Not for her, for me." The words felt like a vow, carved in the quiet. As he headed back to the trailer, Sam was on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar. "You look less like a ghost," he said, not looking up. Jason laughed, a real laugh, startling himself. "Feel less like one." Sam grunted, which was as close to approval as he got. Jason sat beside him, the cedar's sharp scent mixing with the lake's damp air. He didn't know what tomorrow held, a lawyer's call, a trip to Bellevue, maybe coffee with Emily. But he wasn't afraid of it. For the first time in years, the future wasn't a wait. It was a door, and he was ready to walk through.